Hi, I'm Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of Regalytics, with your update on this week's 6,331 regulatory alerts. There were 22 interesting ones, and I don't know how I'm going to get through all 22 here, but I'm going to try. The regulator of the week is New Jersey, and why? It's really only my local friends who are going to care, but they're moving forward with a huge redesign of Liberty State Park. And for those of you not in the area, that means the park that stares at the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. I'm super excited about this because I was just there, and yeah, it's fine. It's a park. But the plans, it's going to be amazing with soccer fields and stadiums and all sorts of better use of what is otherwise a bunch of random bushes and grass. The topic of the week is intermediaries, so the middlemen. Starting with the SEC seeking comment on the activities of information providers, for example, index providers, model portfolio providers, and pricing service providers, and how the SEC is considering whether they too should start registering with the SEC as an investment advisor. The Bank for International Settlements is taking a look at crypto miners and wondering, since they have the ability to manipulate markets with their verification processes, should they be regulated too? Just like I predicted, the FTC, after its big pharma conference last week, came out with a newfound interest in enforcement against pharma middlemen for illegal bribes and rebate schemes that block a patient's access to lower cost drugs. And finally, Pat Toomey at the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee is asking questions about index funds. So investment managers offer index funds to their customers, but when it comes to voting shares in the companies, the investment manager has too much power and discretion to vote those shares, because in the end, the consumer who bought an index fund doesn't really own the shares in the fund, they just own the index. So Toomey is pushing for the passage of the Index Act, which would require asset managers of a passive index fund with more than 1% of a company's voting shares to vote those shares in accordance with the instructions of the fund's investors and not at the discretion of the asset manager. It's been a while since I focused on the weed feed, but there were some good blunts this week. For those of you who missed it, CANRA is the new centralized cannabis regulator these days. They held their first in-person member meeting in Olympia, Washington, and it included more than 150 government officials from 33 different states. And as part of the meeting, they elected a new board. The New York Office of Cannabis Management proposed rules this week around the packaging, labeling, marketing, and advertising of adult use cannabis products. So check that out if you're in the space. And similarly, the Government of Canada proposed new disclosure requirements on vaping product sales and ingredients. And finally, a crazy case out of Massachusetts where a now imprisoned mayor has been joined in prison with his co-conspirator. This guy worked with the mayor to extort a marijuana vendor for donations to the mayor's campaign in return for a political favor to the marijuana vendor. Speaking of mayors, I told you 2 weeks ago that the SEC went after the mayor of a town in Louisiana. Well, this week, the SEC charged the city of Rochester in New York, its former finance director and former school district CFO, with misleading investors in a $119 million bond offering. The SEC also charged their advisor for violating the municipal advisor's fiduciary duty, deceptive practices, and fair dealing provisions of federal securities laws. So that's 10 alerts down and 12 to go. I'm going to go from international to local. Cyber. The Bank of International Settlements is promoting a really big multi-country cyber product to create more safety in the markets, which is going to cover all 19 Euro central banks and the ECB. And separately, but also the same week, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the Banque de France, and the ACPR of France carried out a joint crisis management exercise focused on cybersecurity threats. Moving back to the United States, the White House used a defense spending power to send another $350 million to Ukraine. The Fed obviously raised the interest rates, but also the Fed noted that the latest trend that there has been a surge in publicly listed companies since the pandemic, and they're trying to understand what's going on. But my vote, SPACs. Unquestionably SPACs. The FTC is working on restoring competition in gasoline and diesel markets, specifically in Michigan and Ohio, by requiring certain companies to back off their special fuel arrangements that limit where certain products can be sold. The SEC charged a broker-dealer and 5 of its registered reps with best interest rule violations. I know a lot of you are following that topic. Here's another interesting one I don't fully understand, but the American crypto Fed Dow LLC filed an S1 registration with the SEC and tried to withdraw it. The SEC won't actually let them withdraw their registration because it's not in the public interest. What's going on there? On to the states. Connecticut has joined the ranks of California for having a comprehensive data privacy rule for all of their citizens. And let's bring it to a close with California. The Department of Fair Employment and Housing filed a petition to enforce JP Morgan to file the official large employers report on gender and ethnic and racial breakdowns in the job categories and pay of their employees. California is also moving along with their bill to force companies with revenue over $1 billion to publicly disclose greenhouse gases. California has a hearing this week on a law that it would allow county recorders to, in addition to the regular death and birth paperwork and marriage paperwork, issue the data on a decentralized data system, distributed ledger, or blockchain. And finally, a Nigerian prince was caught for an extensive, long-lasting, multi-million-dollar conspiracy, much of it committed by Nigerian nationals, that perpetrated a wide variety of frauds, including small business fraud, romance scams, elder fraud, and fraud using malware. But the funny thing is that it was perpetrated by 2 guys, a guy named George and another guy named Princewell. So he was sort of a prince in that his first name was Princewell. And that's it this week for Regalytics. We have the most comprehensive, coherent, and customizable regulatory alerts tool in the world. Come and see how company after company is transforming their compliance with this kind of transparency. See you next Wednesday.